I moved over 2,000 miles away without telling anyone in my family. And for a long time, it felt like I had simply stopped existing to them. Like I had quietly erased myself from a story that never really had space for me to begin with. Weeks turned into months, and months stretched further than I ever expected. Yet my phone stayed silent in a way that was almost louder than any argument we'd ever had, because it confirmed something I think I had always known but never wanted to admit. No one checked in, no one asked if I was okay, and no one seemed to notice that I was gone until the exact moment they needed something from me again. That's when everything changed, not because of what they said, but because of what I had already been keeping without them, realizing it. Something small, something simple, but powerful enough to shift the entire balance of how they saw me and how they saw each other. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, and I didn't go back, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting, I was observing, and what I saw made it impossible to pretend things were normal anymore. So instead of replying the way they expected me to, I sent them one package, just one. And whatever they thought they knew about me, about themselves, and about our family didn't survive what was inside it. Before I left, I wasn't the kind of person anyone worried about losing, because I had quietly trained everyone around me to believe I would always be there, no matter what. No matter how late the call came in or how inconvenient the favor was. And somewhere along the way, being dependable slowly turned into being invisible. I was the one who remembered birthdays, who showed up early, who stayed late, who fixed problems that were never really mine to begin with. And I did it so consistently that it stopped being appreciated and started being expected. Like I wasn't helping out of care, but simply fulfilling a role I had been assigned, without ever agreeing to it. No one ever said thank you in a way that felt real, and if they did, it was always followed by another request, another small ask that stacked on top of everything else until it became impossible to tell where my effort ended and their expectations began. And the strangest part was how normal it all felt at the time. Like this was just how families worked, and I was the one who needed to adjust, not them. I told myself I didn't mind, that being needed meant being valued. But deep down, there was always this quiet feeling that something wasn't right, that I was giving more than I was ever getting back, and that if I ever stopped, even for a moment, everything about how they treated me would change in ways I wasn't ready to face yet. It didn't happen all at once, which is probably why I ignored it for so long, because when something builds slowly, it's easy to mistake it for normal, even when it's quietly draining everything out of you. The calls I got were almost never just to talk or check in. They always came with something attached, a favor, a problem, a responsibility that somehow became mine without any real discussion. And I would say yes before I even had time to think about whether I actually could. If my sister needed last-minute help, I rearranged my entire day. If something went wrong at home, I was expected to fix it. And if I hesitated even slightly, it was met with confusion, like I was breaking some unspoken agreement that only I seemed to be aware of. What stood out the most wasn't just what they asked for, but when they reached out. Because the silence between those moments started to feel more intentional than accidental. Like I only existed in their world when I was useful, and the rest of the time, I was just not there. Conversations were short unless they needed something. Updates about my life were brushed past or forgotten, and any attempt I made to talk about how I felt somehow circled back to how stressed they were or how much they were dealing with. Until eventually, I stopped bringing it up altogether. I kept showing up, kept helping, kept telling myself that this is just what being a good daughter, a good sister meant. But deep down, I think I already knew that if I ever stopped playing that role, I would finally see exactly where I stood in their lives. The moment that changed everything wasn't loud or dramatic the way people expect these things to be. It was quiet, almost ordinary on the surface, which somehow made it hurt even more because it showed me exactly how little it took for them to overlook me completely. My sister had something important coming up, and like always, I was the one she relied on to make sure everything went smoothly. And I didn't hesitate. I cleared my schedule, rearranged my plans, and showed up ready to help, the way I always did, expecting nothing more than the usual acknowledgement that I had done my part. But this time, something went wrong that had nothing to do with me. And instead of figuring it out together, the blame landed on me so quickly and so easily that it felt rehearsed, like I had always been the safest place to put their frustration, because I would never push back. I remember standing there, trying to explain myself, not even angrily, just calmly, hoping that if I spoke clearly enough, they would understand. But they didn't. Or maybe they just didn't want to, because it was easier to let me carry it than to take responsibility themselves. What stayed with me wasn't the accusation. It was how quickly everyone agreed with it, how naturally the conversation shifted into making me the problem. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It just stopped. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself any further. Because for the first time, I realized that no amount of explaining was going to change how they saw me. And that was the exact moment I started thinking about leaving. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I didn't leave in a dramatic way. There was no announcement, no final argument, no moment where I told them exactly how I felt. Because by then, I understood that words had never really changed anything between us. So I chose something different, something quieter and a lot more honest. I made my plans slowly, carefully, tying up the parts of my life that were actually mine, and letting go of the ones that only existed because of them. And when the day finally came, I packed what I needed, booked a one-way move, and stepped into a version of my life where I wasn't automatically responsible for everyone else. At first, it felt strange, almost unsettling, because I kept expecting my phone to ring or a message to come through asking where I was or if something was wrong. But nothing came. Not that day, not the next, and not for a long time after that. And the silence started to stretch in a way that made everything clearer than any conversation ever could. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and with every passing moment, the absence of their concern said more than their words ever had, because it confirmed that my presence in their lives had never been about me. It had always been about what I could do for them. So instead of reaching out, instead of filling that silence the way I always had, I let it exist. Because for the first time, I wanted to see what would happen if I stopped being the one who held everything together. At some point, the silence stopped feeling accidental and started to feel like an answer. And that's when I made a decision that I hadn't fully planned but somehow felt necessary. I decided I wouldn't reach out first, not even once, because I needed to know what would happen if I completely stepped out of the role I had been playing for so long. I told myself it wasn't about proving anything. It was just about observing, about finally seeing things as they were instead of how I had convinced myself they were. And once I made that choice, something shifted inside me. Not emotionally, but mentally. Like I was watching my own life from a distance for the first time. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually it had been long enough that even I started questioning whether I had imagined how one-sided everything felt. But then something happened that answered that doubt instantly. Because the first real contact I got after all that time wasn't a simple, "How are you?" or "We miss you." It was a request, direct and almost urgent, like no time had passed at all, like nothing had changed except the fact that they needed something again. And that was the moment everything became undeniable. Because it wasn't just about being overlooked anymore. It was about being remembered only when I was useful. And once I saw that clearly, I knew I couldn't go back to pretending it was anything else. So instead of responding the way I always had, I paused. And for the first time, I thought carefully about what I was going to do next. I didn't respond right away, even though every part of me was used to answering instantly, fixing things before anyone had to ask twice. But this time, I let the message sit there, while I thought about everything that had led up to this moment and what I actually wanted to do with it. I wasn't angry anymore, which surprised me the most, because if this had happened months earlier, I probably would have reacted emotionally or tried to explain myself again. But now I saw it differently, clearer, almost like the situation had already explained itself without needing me to say a word. That's when I decided on something simple, something that didn't involve arguing or defending myself, because I knew neither of those things had ever worked before. And instead of replying with words, I put together everything I had quietly kept over time. Every missed call that never came, every one-sided message, every moment that showed exactly how things had been between us without any exaggeration or emotion added to it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't edited to make a point. It was just the truth laid out in a way that couldn't be ignored or misunderstood. I packed it all into one box, sealed it, and sent it without any explanation. Because I didn't need to tell them what it meant. I needed them to see it for themselves. And whatever reaction they had after opening it was no longer something I felt responsible for. What happened after that wasn't immediate, but it also wasn't surprising. Because once the box reached them and everything inside it was finally seen instead of ignored, the silence I had experienced for months didn't stay quiet on their side anymore. Messages started coming in. Not the kind I used to receive, filled with requests or assumptions, but confused ones, defensive ones, and eventually ones that sounded like people trying to piece together something they had never questioned before. And for the first time, the focus wasn't on what I could do for them. It was on what they had done, without realizing it. I didn't respond the way they expected, and I didn't rush to fix anything, because there was nothing left for me to fix. And whatever conversations or conflicts happened after that were no longer centered around me being the easy answer to their problems. They were finally looking at each other, at their own actions, and that shift changed everything in a way no argument ever could. Some relationships faded, some turned distant, and some stopped completely. But instead of feeling like a loss, it felt like clarity. Like everything had finally settled into its true place without me holding it together anymore. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for a message. I wasn't trying to prove my value. I was just at peace with what I had seen and what I had chosen to do with it. And if you've ever felt like you're only remembered when you're needed, then maybe the hardest but most important thing you can do isn't to explain yourself louder, but to step back quietly and let the truth speak for itself. And if this story resonated with you even a little, take that as your sign that you're allowed to choose yourself too. And if you want more stories like this that remind you of your worth, you already know what to do.